What in the seven hells of Drixia is that? Counselor T-Zix's mandibles clicked furiously as the main view screen displayed a fleet of spacecraft that looked like they'd been dragged through a supernova and back. Those, esteemed counselor, High Chancellor Vorn said with the careful pronunciation of someone trying not to scream, appear to be ships of the newly discovered species from Sector 8472, the humans. The Grand Council chamber fell silent as the assembled representatives of the Galactic Confederation's 37 most advanced civilizations stared at the approaching vessels. The ships were a hodgepodge of designs. Military vessels with obvious weapon modifications, science vessels bristling with improvised armor plating, and what appeared to be mining craft repurposed as battering rams. All of them were scorched, pitted, and smeared with what could only be described as the space equivalent of blood and guts. They can't possibly expect to dock at the Galactic Spire looking like that, Counselor Floor bubbled, his gelatinous form rippling with indignation. There are protocols, standards, aesthetic considerations. I've been informed they're requesting emergency landing clearance, Vorn replied, his 12 eyes blinking in rapid succession, a sure sign of Vorlaxian distress. Something about bringing news of the Hive. A collective gasp swept through the chamber. The Hive. Even mentioning that scourge was considered bad form in polite galactic society. Impossible, declared Ambassador Xylos, his crystalline structure vibrating with skepticism. No species makes first contact with the Hive and lives to tell about it, especially not a pre-FTL civilization that only achieved spaceflight in the last galactic moment. Apparently, Vorn said, reading from a datapad with increasing disbelief, they not only made contact, but they're claiming to have neutralized the threat. A beat of silence, then uproarious laughter rippled through the chamber. Oh, that's rich, Counselor Zizix wheezed, nearly falling from her anti-gravity perch. Next they'll be saying they've taught the Void Kraken to do synchronized swimming. The laughter abruptly ceased as the largest of the human vessels, a behemoth that looked like someone had welded guns to a skyscraper, maneuvered to present its port side to the Council station. Emblazoned across its hull, partially obscured by what appeared to be acid burns and blast marks, was a crudely painted message. We killed them all. You're welcome. Below it was a simplistic rendering of a human face with 2 dots for eyes and a curved line forming what scholars of xenobiology would later identify as a smiley face. Well, said Ambassador Kree, adjusting her ceremonial robes nervously, I suppose we should hear what they have to say. Captain Leonid Kuznetsov of the United Earth Defense Force flagship Righteous Vengeance strode onto the magnificent docking bay of the Galactic Spire with what could charitably be called a swagger, and more accurately described as the gait of someone who hadn't slept in 4 days and was running entirely on stimulants, adrenaline, and spite. Behind him trailed his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Andrea Thompson, his chief science officer, Dr. Kazuo Nakamura, and a squad of Marines whose battle armor was still smoking in places. The Welcoming Committee, a collection of beings so diverse that the human brain struggled to categorize them all as people, stood in perfect formation, their ceremonial attire pristine, their postures impeccable. In contrast, Captain Kuznetsov's uniform was missing a sleeve, had a suspicious green stain across the chest, and smelled strongly of ozone and copper. His face sported a magnificent black eye and a beard that appeared to have been trimmed with a plasma cutter. He stopped 3 paces from the High Chancellor, snapped to attention with military precision that seemed incongruous with his disheveled appearance, and spoke in a voice that sounded like gravel being crushed. Captain Leonid Kuznetsov, United Earth Defense Force. We come seeking urgent audience with your council. He paused, then added, Sorry about the mess. The Hive doesn't fight clean. High Chancellor Vorn, to his credit, recovered quickly. Welcome to the Galactic Spire, Captain. We are somewhat surprised by your arrival. Our records indicate that your species has only achieved spaceflight within the last century, and yet you claim to have encountered and survived the Hive. Kuznetsov barked a laugh that held no humor. Encountered? Chancellor, we've been at war with those chitinous bastards for the past 18 months. They showed up in our system, started harvesting our outer colonies, and apparently thought we'd just roll over and die like good little meatbags. The Welcoming Committee exchanged glances. Dr. Nakamura stepped forward, his tablet displaying images that made several council members' visual organs dilate in distress. The Hive entered our solar system approximately 548 Earth days ago, he explained, his voice clinical despite the horror depicted on his screen. They began systematic operations on our colony on Europa, Jupiter's moon. By the time we understood what was happening, they had established a foothold and were using human biological material to accelerate adaptation to our biochemistry. Lieutenant Commander Thompson cut in, her voice hard. In other words, they were eating our people and using them to upgrade themselves. That's their standard operational procedure, one of the council aides murmured. They've consumed 17 known civilizations this way. None have survived. Yeah, well, they picked the wrong planet this time, Kuznetsov growled. Turns out humans aren't just good at adapting. We're pretty damn good at making others regret forcing us to adapt. The captain pulled a small device from his pocket and projected a hologram of Earth's solar system. Red markers bloomed across the outer planets, showing hive infestations. They hit us hard and fast. Within 2 months, they'd taken our colonies on Europa, Ganymede, and had started establishing hives on Mars. We lost 30 million colonists in the first wave. The silence in the docking bay was absolute. But then, Kuznetsov continued, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Something interesting happened. The hive made a critical mistake. They gave us time to get angry. This is preposterous, Counselor Tzix chittered, pacing the length of the emergency session chamber. You expect us to believe that a pre-council civilization with barely functional FTL technology not only survived a hive incursion but defeated them? The same hive that the combined forces of the Confederation have been containing, at great cost, for millennia? Captain Kuznetsov leaned back in his chair, which wasn't designed for human physiology, making him look like a bear trying to sit at a dollhouse tea party, and shrugged. Believe what you want, Counselor, but the fact remains, we're here, and the hive in our system isn't. I've got about 2,000 tons of alien carcasses in my cargo hold if you want proof. The Grand Council chamber erupted into chaos, various species communicating their disbelief and outrage in a cacophony of sounds ranging from subsonic vibrations to ultrasonic screeching. High Chancellor Vorn raised all 4 of his arms, calling for silence. Captain, you must understand our skepticism. The hive is the most formidable enemy the Confederation has ever faced. Our most advanced civilizations, with technologies thousands of years beyond yours, have only managed to establish a containment perimeter around hive-controlled space, and even that is not always successful. Dr. Nakamura stepped forward, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to his captain's irreverence. With respect, Chancellor, I believe the fundamental difference lies in our approach to the problem. From what we've gathered from your historical records accessed during our journey here, the Confederation has treated the hive as a force of nature to be avoided or contained, like a stellar phenomenon or a gravitational anomaly. The science officer tapped at his tablet, and a new hologram appeared above the council table. Hive biology, cellular structures, neural pathways. We treated them as an enemy to be understood, exploited, and ultimately destroyed. We didn't have the luxury of containment as an option. They were already in our home. Lieutenant Commander Thompson nodded grimly. When you're fighting for survival, you get creative. And humans have always been exceptionally creative when it comes to killing things. The council members shifted uncomfortably. Ambassador Xylos's crystalline form refracted light in patterns that indicated deep thought. But even with creativity, the technological gap is insurmountable. The hive possesses biotechnology that can adapt to any conventional weapon within hours of exposure. Kuznetsov grinned, a facial expression that several council species found deeply unsettling, resembling as it did the threat displays of various apex predators. Who said anything about conventional weapons? You weaponized what? Councillor Florb's translucent body had turned an alarming shade of purple as the human delegation explained their strategy. Prions, Dr. Nakamura repeated patiently. Self-replicating misfolded proteins, similar to those that cause transmissible spongiform encephalopathies in Earth mammals, what we call mad cow disease, scrapie, or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. But the hive's biological adaptation mechanisms would, began one of the council's science advisors. Exactly, Thompson interrupted. The hive's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. They adapt by consuming and incorporating biological material. We gave them something that their adaptation process would eagerly assimilate and spread throughout their neural networks. Kuznetsov chuckled. Turns out, when a hive node starts going mad, it doesn't stop to think that maybe it shouldn't upload its experiences to the collective. The council chamber was dead silent as the implications sank in. You poisoned them, Ambassador Kikri whispered, her feathers bristling. No, Kuznetsov corrected, his humor vanishing. We exterminated a hostile force that was liquefying human children to make bioweapons. There's a difference. But the scale of destruction, Vorn murmured, studying the data on the hive losses. You're claiming to have eliminated not just the invasion force, but pursued them back to their staging area and sterilized it, Thompson supplied when the Chancellor seemed unable to complete the thought. Yes. Once we understood their FTL navigation methods, we were able to track the surviving vessels back to their forward operating base in what you call the Cygnus Arm. And you're sure it was the hive's main staging area? Asked Xylos. Nakamura's expression remained impassive. No, that's why we're here. Our intelligence suggests that what we encountered was merely an exploratory arm of a much larger collective. We need your star charts, your historical data on hive movements, and any biological samples you've managed to collect. To what end? Tzix demanded, mandibles clicking furiously. Kuznetsov leaned forward, elbows on the ancient council table, another breach of protocol that made several counselors wince. Isn't it obvious? We're going to find the rest of them, and then we're going to do what you've been afraid to do for the last 10,000 years. Which is? Vorn asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. The captain's smile was cold. We're going to burn them out of the galaxy, every last one of them. The Council's deliberations had stretched into the equivalent of 3 Earth days. During this time, the human delegation had been given quarters that, while luxurious by their standards, were clearly designed to keep them isolated from the rest of the Spire's inhabitants. Not that the humans minded. They had spent the time recovering from their journey, treating injuries, and preparing their presentation for the full council. Captain Kuznetsov stood at the viewport of their assigned suite, watching the elegant dance of spacecraft around the magnificent spire, the literal and figurative center of galactic civilization. Ships of designs he could barely comprehend glided effortlessly through the void, their hulls pristine, their movements graceful. In contrast, the human fleet hung at a respectful distance, their battered forms a stark reminder of the brutal conflict they had endured. The Righteous Vengeance had started its life as the EFS Konstantinov, a science vessel designed for deep space exploration. Now it bristled with weapon emplacements, improvised armor, and the scars of countless battles. They're afraid of us, Thompson said, joining him at the viewport. She had finally managed to shower and change into a clean uniform, though the dark circles under her eyes remained. Can you blame them? Kuznetsov replied without turning. We've upended their entire worldview, 1,000 years of galactic policy, rendered obsolete by a bunch of primitives from an unremarkable yellow star. It's more than that, Thompson mused. I've been studying their available historical texts. The Confederation was founded on principles of harmony, cooperation, and non-aggression. War, as we understand it, hasn't existed among the member species for millennia. Lucky them, the captain said dryly. No, I mean they genuinely don't understand us. The concept of a species that responds to an existential threat by immediately developing more effective ways to kill is alien to them. She paused. We terrify them. Kuznetsov finally turned to face his XO, his expression thoughtful. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Fear is a powerful motivator. Before Thompson could respond, the suite's communication system chimed. Captain Kuznetsov, came the measured voice of Chancellor Vorn. The Council has reached a decision and requests your presence. Kuznetsov straightened his uniform jacket, the new one provided by the Council's fabricators, which fit perfectly, but somehow felt less comfortable than his battle-worn original. Well, he said to Thompson and Nakamura, who had emerged from the adjacent room. Let's go find out if we've got allies or not. The Grand Council chamber was filled to capacity. Not only were all 37 Confederation member species represented, but observers from dozens of client worlds packed the galleries. News of the humans' arrival, and their extraordinary claims, had spread throughout the spire. As the human delegation entered, a hush fell over the assembly. High Chancellor Vorn stood at the center of the circular chamber, his ceremonial robes shimmering with embedded quantum particles that shifted in patterns too complex for human eyes to fully appreciate. Captain Leonid Kuznetsov of Earth, he began, his voice amplified not by technology, but by the perfect acoustics of the ancient chamber. The Council has reviewed your testimony, examined the evidence you have provided, and deliberated extensively on your request for alliance against the Hive Collective. Kuznetsov stood at parade rest, his face impassive. In 10,000 years of Confederation history, Vorn continued, we have never encountered a species quite like humanity. Your rapid technological advancement is remarkable, your adaptability is unprecedented, and your capacity for both compassion and violence is disquieting. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Hive has been the shadow that has hung over our civilization since before the founding of the Confederation. Our ancestors tried to fight them, as you have. The results were catastrophic. Entire species extinguished, worlds rendered uninhabitable, sectors of space so contaminated with Hive bioweapons that they remain quarantined to this day. The Chancellor's 12 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that Dr. Nakamura had learned indicated deep emotional significance. When direct confrontation failed, our ancestors made the difficult choice to establish the containment protocol. For 9,000 years, we have maintained a perimeter around Hive-controlled space, sacrificing worlds and resources to preserve the greater peace of the galaxy. With respect, Chancellor, Kuznetsov interjected, his voice carrying clearly across the chamber. Containment is just a slow death. The Hive expands. That's what it does. That's all it does. Eventually, they would have broken through your perimeter. And then what? More retreats? More sacrifices? Until there's nowhere left to run? A ripple of discomfort moved through the council representatives. Perhaps, Vorn acknowledged, but such events would have occurred beyond our lifetimes, perhaps beyond the lifetimes of our civilizations. The duty of governance is to provide for the well-being of the current generation, while laying the groundwork for the future. How noble, Thompson muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Chancellor Vorn fixed his gaze on her. You disapprove, Lieutenant Commander? Thompson stepped forward, ignoring Kuznetsov's warning glance. Where I come from, we have a saying. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Your containment protocol isn't a solution. It's an abdication of responsibility, pushing the problem onto future generations because you're too afraid to face it yourselves. Outraged exclamations erupted from several council members, but Thompson pressed on. We lost 30 million people in the initial attack. 30 million. Men, women, children, all gone because we had no warning, no preparation. How many other emerging civilizations have you sacrificed by keeping the Hive secret? How many species have been consumed because they weren't advanced enough to join your little club and receive your protection? That's enough, Commander, Kuznetsov said quietly, but there was no rebuke in his tone. Chancellor Vorn raised his arms for silence, which gradually returned to the chamber. Your passion is noted, Lieutenant Commander Thompson, and not without merit. The Chancellor's voice had softened. The question of our moral responsibility to pre-Council civilizations has been debated extensively throughout our history. There are no easy answers. Actually, Dr. Nakamura spoke up, his voice calm but firm. There is an easy answer, Chancellor. You help us destroy the Hive, once and for all. And if we refuse? Councillor Tzix chittered. Kuznetsov shrugged. Then we'll do it ourselves. It'll take longer, cost more lives. Probably a lot of them human. But we'll get it done. We're stubborn that way. The captain stepped forward, addressing not just the council leadership, but the entire assembly. Look, I get it. You're afraid. The Hive has been the bogeyman of your civilization for thousands of years. You've built your entire society around avoiding confrontation with them. But here's the thing. They're not invincible. They're not gods. They're just another predatory species that's never encountered adequate resistance. He gestured to the data displays still hovering above the council table, showing the aftermath of battles in the Sol system. We beat them because we had to. Because there was no other option. But mostly, we beat them because they didn't expect us to fight back with everything we had. The Hive's greatest advantage isn't their technology or their biology. It's the fear they inspire. And humanity? We got over being afraid about 3 days into the war. A strange silence had fallen over the chamber. It wasn't the tense silence of before, but something almost like anticipation. Chancellor Vorn studied Kuznetsov for a long moment before speaking. And what exactly are you proposing, Captain? Kuznetsov smiled, a genuine smile this time, not the predatory grin he'd worn earlier. A partnership. You've got the technology, the resources, and the knowledge of Hive movements throughout the galaxy. We've got the will to fight and proven methods to defeat them. Together, we can end this threat once and for all. And afterward? Ambassador Zelos asked, crystalline structure shimmering with complex emotions. If by some miracle we succeed in eradicating the Hive, what then? A species as martial as humanity, with access to Confederation technology? Some might consider that exchanging one threat for another. The captain didn't flinch from the accusation. That's a fair concern. I won't pretend humans are perfect. We've got a long, bloody history of fighting amongst ourselves. But there's another thing about humans you should know. We make loyal friends and terrible enemies. Help us now. Treat us as equals afterward, and you'll never have to find out which one you'd be. The council's final deliberations were conducted in private, with the human delegation escorted back to their quarters to await the decision. Hours stretched into what felt like days as Kuznetsov, Thompson, and Nakamura tried to distract themselves from the weight of what hung in the balance. Not just the fate of the alliance they sought, but potentially the future of humanity in the galactic community. "Do you think we pushed too hard?" Thompson asked, breaking a long silence. Kuznetsov, who had been attempting to sleep on a piece of furniture designed for a species with a very different spinal structure, opened one eye. "Probably, but subtlety was never going to work here. They needed to understand exactly what they're dealing with, both with the Hive and with us." "I've been analyzing the council members' reactions," Nakamura said, looking up from his tablet. "Based on their species' physiological responses, I believe we have support from approximately 42% of the voting representatives." "Not enough," Kuznetsov grunted. "No," the science officer agreed. "But there's another factor at play. The younger species, those who joined the Confederation more recently, showed significantly more positive responses to our presentation. They haven't been indoctrinated into the containment philosophy for as many generations." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "So we've planted the seeds of doubt in their perfect consensus." "It might not matter," Kuznetsov said, sitting up with a wince. "If they say no, we go back to Earth and prepare to fight alone. It'll be harder, but we'll manage. Humanity always does." The suite's communication system chimed, cutting off further discussion. "Captain Kuznetsov," came Chancellor Vorn's voice. "The Council requests your immediate presence for the announcement of our decision." The three humans exchanged glances, then wordlessly moved to make themselves presentable. Whatever came next would determine the course of human history for generations to come. For the second time in as many days, the human delegation stood before the full Galactic Council. This time, however, the chamber was even more crowded, with additional galleries open to accommodate observers from throughout the spire. High Chancellor Vorn stood at the center of the chamber, his posture formal, his many eyes unreadable to human perception. "Captain Leonid Kuznetsov of Earth, Lieutenant Commander Andrea Thompson, Dr. Kazuo Nakamura," he began, addressing each by name. "The Galactic Confederation has reached a decision regarding your proposal for joint action against the Hive Collective." The chamber was so silent that Kuznetsov could hear the soft hum of the environmental systems. By tradition dating back to the founding of the Confederation, such decisions require a 2/3 majority to authorize military action of any kind. Vorn paused, his upper arms moving in what Nakamura had identified as a gesture of significance. The vote was 65% in favor, 2% abstaining. Thompson inhaled sharply beside Kuznetsov. "Not enough." "However," Vorn continued, "there is a provision in our founding charter that has never before been invoked. In cases of extreme existential threat to the Confederation as a whole, the High Chancellor may, with the unanimous support of the founding 7 species, authorize extraordinary measures without a full council vote." Murmurs broke out across the chamber. "The founding 7 have conferred and have reached a unanimous decision." Vorn's voice took on a formal quality, as if reciting ancient words. "The threat posed by the Hive Collective constitutes an existential danger to all sentient life in the galaxy. Continuation of the containment protocol is deemed insufficient in light of the new intelligence provided by the human delegation." Kuznetsov felt his heart rate accelerate, but kept his face carefully neutral. "Therefore, by the authority vested in me as High Chancellor, and with the full support of the founding 7, I hereby authorize the formation of a joint Confederation human task force for the express purpose of developing and implementing a comprehensive strategy to eliminate the Hive threat from our galaxy." The chamber erupted, some species vocalizing approval, others expressing shock or dismay, still others communicating in frequencies or methods incomprehensible to human senses. Chancellor Vorn raised all 4 arms, gradually restoring order to the assembly. "Captain Kuznetsov, your species has demonstrated both the will and the capacity to confront this ancient enemy. The Confederation offers not just alliance, but partnership in this endeavor. Our technology, our resources, our knowledge, all will be made available to this joint task force." The Chancellor descended from his elevated position to stand directly before Kuznetsov. a breach of protocol that sent another wave of murmurs through the chamber. But understand this, Captain. If we commit to this path, there is no turning back. The Hive will respond with everything at its disposal. Worlds may burn, species may suffer. The galaxy itself may be forever changed by the conflict to come. Kuznetsov met the Chancellor's gaze steadily. With respect, Chancellor, the galaxy is already changing. The only question is whether we control that change or become victims of it. Vorn's primary eyes blinked in what might have been respect. Then let it be recorded in the eternal archives of the Confederation that on this day a new era began, one in which we no longer hide from the darkness, but confront it directly. The Chancellor extended his upper right arm, the one closest to his primary heart, Nakamura had explained earlier, in the Confederation's formal gesture of alliance. Captain Kuznetsov stepped forward and clasped the offered appendage firmly in the human gesture of a handshake. To the future of the galaxy, Vorn said. To the end of the Hive, Kuznetsov replied. And throughout the galactic spire, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity had arrived, their ships stained with the blood of the Confederation's greatest enemy, and nothing would ever be the same again. 18 months later, the joint Confederation human fleet emerged from FTL at the coordinates designated Target Alpha, the largest known Hive breeding world in the Cygnus Arm. Leading the armada was the UEDFS Righteous Vengeance II, no longer a converted science vessel but a purpose-built dreadnought, incorporating the best of human ingenuity and Confederation technology. On its bridge stood Captain Leonid Kuznetsov, now bearing the additional title of Confederation Battle Commander, the first non-member species to hold such a rank in the Confederation's long history. Sensors confirm Hive presence, reported Lieutenant Commander Thompson from her station. Massive activity on the surface and in orbit. They know we're here. Good, Kuznetsov said, surveying the tactical display where hundreds of Hive vessels were moving to intercept. I'd hate for them to miss the party. He opened a channel to the fleet. 500 ships representing 23 Confederation species alongside the human contingent. All vessels. This is Battle Commander Kuznetsov. Commence Operation Guillotine. For Earth, for the Confederation, and for every species that never got the chance to fight back. Let's finish this. As the fleet moved into attack formation, Dr. Nakamura joined Kuznetsov at the command station, his expression thoughtful. Something on your mind, Doctor? The captain asked. I was just thinking about our first arrival at the Galactic Spire, Nakamura said. How shocked they were by our blood-stained ships and our willingness to fight. Kuznetsov nodded. And now? The science officer gestured to the view screen, where Confederation vessels were moving with disciplined precision alongside their human counterparts, weapons hot, shields raised. Now they understand what we knew all along, that sometimes the only path to peace is through fire. Kuznetsov smiled grimly as the first salvos launched toward the Hive fleet. Let's make it a cleansing one. And as the battle was joined, the stars themselves seemed to bear witness to the truth that the galaxy had finally learned. The most dangerous species in the universe was not the one that consumed worlds, but the one that refused to be consumed. Humanity, bloodied but unbowed, bringing fire and fury to the enemies of life itself. The end. You're in my seat, monkey. Zoe Nakamura didn't even look up from her quantum physics textbook. The Academy's cafeteria buzzed with the usual lunchtime cacophony, a blend of 8 different species' languages, the scrape of chairs designed for varying anatomies, and the occasional hiss of a food sterilizer ensuring cross-species contamination didn't result in an embarrassing trip to the medbay. I said, you're in my seat. Now she looked up. Looming over her was Kraxthel, all 7 feet of blue-scaled adolescent Vordaxian male. His secondary arms were folded across his chest while his primary ones rested on the table, encroaching deliberately into what humans called personal space, and what the Galactic Union officially termed species-specific proximity comfort zone. Zoe dog-eared her page, an old Earth habit that made the Academy librarian, a Holotian with 17 eyes, twitch violently, and smiled. Funny, I don't see your name on it. The cafeteria noise dimmed slightly, a classic sign that something interesting was happening. Teenagers across the galaxy might have different numbers of appendages, respiratory systems, and fundamental biochemistries, but gossip receptors seemed universal. We don't mark our territory with primitive scratches, human, Kraxthal hissed, a sound like air escaping a bicycle tire. His dorsal spines rose slightly, a warning sign that Zoe recognized from the mandatory xenobiology classes all students had to take. Our territorial claims are understood through hierarchical social contexts. Zoe's smile widened. Wow, big words. Did your translator glitch, or are you trying to sound smart? A ripple of suppressed laughter, some clicking, some gurgling, some recognizably human, spread across nearby tables. Listen, dirt spawn. Craxthal leaned closer, his breath smelling strangely of cinnamon and ammonia. This is the apex table. That means peak predators only. Oh, I'm sorry, Zoe said, not sounding sorry at all. I thought this was the remedial xenobiology students table. My mistake. That earned a definite laugh from somewhere behind her. Probably Talvex, the Andarian exchange student whose laugh sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. Craxthal's scales darkened from azure to midnight blue, the Vordaxian equivalent of flushing with anger. You think you're clever, human? Not particularly, Zoe said, reopening her textbook. But I think I'm trying to study quantum dimensional flux patterns, and you're interrupting. That's when it happened. Craxthal's secondary left hand shot out, grabbed Zoe's textbook, and flung it across the cafeteria where it hit the protein dispensary with a sad plop. The room went silent. Hey! Zoe stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. That's Academy property, you oversized iguana? Craxthal grinned, displaying 3 rows of serrated teeth. What are you going to do about it, monkey? Everyone knows humans are the weakest species in the Galactic Union. It's why you need those fancy gravity compensators just to walk around. Zoe's brown eyes narrowed. You want to test that theory? Craxthal's 4 arms spread wide in a universal come-at-me gesture. Please, entertain us all. The Vordaxian stood a full 2 feet taller than Zoe, outweighed her by at least 150 pounds, and had twice as many limbs. More importantly, he came from a death world with 1.8 times Earth's gravity. The entire cafeteria knew this was going to be over in seconds. They were right. 10 seconds earlier, Principal Administrator DeVex had been enjoying a quiet lunch in his office. As the first Centaurian to run an integrated Galactic Academy branch, he took pride in the relative lack of incidents at Earth Station Alpha. Humans might be newcomers to the galactic community, but they were adaptable, somewhat intelligent, and, most critically, eager to prove themselves. His lunch was interrupted by a priority alert on his neural interface. Physical altercation detected, Cafeteria Section 7. Participants, human, 1, Vordaxian 1, threat level, moderate medic status. Dispatched to DeVex's 4 hearts sank simultaneously. A human Vordaxian conflict? This was exactly the sort of incident that could trigger diplomatic complaints. The Vordaxian hegemony already viewed humanity's rapid integration into galactic society with suspicion. An injured human student would mean paperwork. A lot of paperwork. He rushed to the cafeteria, his centipede-like lower body propelling him at speeds that would have earned him a citation in the corridors if he wasn't exempt from his own rules. What he saw when he arrived wasn't what he expected. And that's why you never skip xenophysiology class, kids, Zoe said, dusting off her hands as she stood over the sprawled form of Craxthal. The Vordaxian wasn't moving much, beyond a pathetic twitch in his tail. All 4 of his arms were bent at angles that, while potentially normal for a species with double-jointed limbs, didn't look particularly comfortable. What? How? Stammered Lix, a Procyon whose fur was standing on end with excitement. Zoe shrugged. Simple physics and xenobiology. Vordaxians have incredible upper body strength and tough scales, but their knee joints bend backward compared to ours and have a critical pressure point. She pointed to the back of Craxthal's knee equivalent. Hit that while they're postured aggressively and down they go. But he's twice your size, protested another student. Size isn't everything, Zoe said with a wink. Also, Earth's gravity is only 0.55 of Vordax Prime. I've been living in their native gravity my whole life during our station's rotation cycle. She flexed a bicep jokingly. We might look squishy, but humans are surprisingly dense. That's not what my cultural sensitivity training told me about humans, said a confused Perlaxian, their eye stalks swiveling in confusion. Oh, I meant physically dense, muscularly, Zoe clarified, though the other interpretation is fair too. That's when Principal DeVex arrived, his front segments rearing up in alarm. Student Nakamura, explain this immediately. Zoe straightened her academy uniform. Cross-species educational exchange, sir. Practical demonstration of comparative xenophysiology with a focus on gravitational adaptation variables. DeVex's compound eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of disbelief among Centaurians. And student Craxthal volunteered for this demonstration? He made a very compelling argument about apex predators and territorial claims, sir, Zoe said solemnly. I felt it would be disrespectful to his cultural heritage not to engage. From the floor, Kraxthal managed a groan. The medic drones finally arrived, hovering over the fallen Vordaxian with scanning beams. "No serious damage detected," announced the lead drone in its cheerful medical voice. "Minor soft tissue injuries consistent with rapid gravitational displacement. Recommendation: 24-hour observation and cultural sensitivity review." DevX's antenna twitched, the Centaurian equivalent of a sigh. "Student Nakamura, my office. Now, the rest of you, return to your lunch activities." As the crowd dispersed, Talvex, the Andarian, glided up to Zoe. "That was illuminating," they said, their crystalline body refracting light in patterns that indicated amusement. "Just doing my part for interspecies relations," Zoe replied with a grin. "The Vordaxians won't forget this," Talvex warned, their voice chiming with concern. Zoe glanced back at Kraxthal being loaded onto a hover gurney. "Good. Maybe next time they'll think twice before underestimating the monkeys." Principal Devek's office was a testament to inclusive design, featuring seating arrangements for everything from methane-breathing floating gas bags to silicon-based crystalline entities. Zoe sat in a standard humanoid chair, trying not to look too pleased with herself. "Do you understand the diplomatic implications of what just happened?" Devex asked, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard galactic. "I defended myself against bullying behavior using minimum necessary force," Zoe replied. "As permitted under Academy Regulation 47B, subsection Interspecies Conflict Resolution." Devex's antennae twitched again. "You've been studying the regulations." "My parents are diplomats, sir. Reading fine print is a family tradition." The principal's compound eyes focused on Zoe with uncomfortable intensity. "The regulation also specifies attempting verbal de-escalation first." "I did," Zoe said. "He threw my textbook after I tried to disengage." Devex made a noise that the translator didn't catch, likely a Centaurian expletive. "The Vordaxian embassy will still file a complaint." "Let them," Zoe said, then added quickly. "With all due respect, sir, the surveillance drones captured everything. Kraxthal initiated physical contact. I responded with proportional force." "You humiliated him." "That was his choice, not mine," Zoe countered. "He chose to make a public spectacle about human weakness. The audience was his idea." Devex's front segments lowered slightly, a sign of resignation. "You understand that species like the Vordaxians value pride and social hierarchy above almost everything?" "Yes, sir. That's why he won't bother me again. Or he'll escalate beyond Academy grounds where regulations don't protect you," Devex warned. For the first time, Zoe's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "You think he'd risk his family's diplomatic status over this?" "Teenagers across all known sentient species share one trait. Student Nakamura. Poor impulse control combined with an overdeveloped sense of vengeance." Zoe considered this. "So what happens now?" "Standard consequence protocol. You'll both attend remedial cultural sensitivity training and write reflection essays on nonviolent conflict resolution across species boundaries." "But he started it," Zoe protested, suddenly sounding very much like the 17-year-old human she was. "And I'm finishing it," Devex said with surprising firmness. "Unless you'd prefer I contact your parents about this incident?" Zoe slumped in her chair. "No, sir." "Good. Report to Cultural Integration Officer to Pring after final bell tomorrow. Dismissed." As Zoe stood to leave, Devex added, "One more thing, Student Nakamura." She paused at the door. "Sir?" "That takedown technique. Where exactly did you learn it?" Zoe's face remained carefully neutral. "Xenobiology textbook, Chapter 17. Morphological vulnerabilities across dominant species." "Interesting. I don't recall that being in the standard curriculum." "It was supplemental reading, sir." Devex's antennae twitched once more. "Indeed. Well, perhaps you could spend more time on the chapters covering diplomatic approaches rather than physical weaknesses." "I'll take that under advisement, sir." As the door closed behind her, Devex activated his neural interface. "Update Academy security protocols. Flag. Potential human combat capabilities significantly underestimated in current threat assessment matrices." The system acknowledged with a soft chime. Devex settled his segmented body more comfortably. Humanity's integration into the Galactic Union was proving more interesting than anyone had anticipated. News travels fast in high school. News travels at FTL speeds in an interspecies academy orbiting Earth. By the time Zoe made it to her applied xenolinguistics class, 3 different species had offered her congratulations in their native tongues, one of which involved a ceremonial spray of pheromones that would take days to wash out of her uniform, and several others had given her a noticeably wider berth in the hallways. "You're either very brave or very stupid," remarked Lina Olson, one of the few other human students, sliding into the seat next to Zoe. "Possibly both." "I prefer educational," Zoe replied, powering up her data tablet. Lina snorted. "You know his father is the Vordaxian cultural attaché, right?" "And my mother is Earth's deputy ambassador to the Galactic Union," Zoe countered. "If we're playing my parent can beat up your parent, I like my odds." "This isn't about parents," Lina said, lowering her voice as their Holosian instructor floated into the room. "The Vordaxians have these things called honor clutches, basically cousins who are bound by blood oath to avenge family humiliations." Zoe's confident expression wavered. "That wasn't in the cultural briefing packet." "It's not exactly something they advertise. My dad works in xenoanthropology at the embassy. He says there are dozens of cultural practices that don't make it into the official briefings because they'd complicate diplomatic relations." "Great," Zoe muttered. "So I might have a blood vendetta against me now?" "Probably not that serious," Lina reassured her, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "But I'd watch my back for a while if I were you." "Attention, language receptacles," called their instructor, Professor Zix, whose 17 eyes were all focused on different students simultaneously. "Today we explore the fascinating glottal peculiarities of the Andarian crystal resonance communication system." The class settled in, but Zoe found it hard to concentrate. She kept thinking about Kraxthal's expression as he hit the floor. Not just pain or surprise, but something deeper. Humiliation. Rage! She'd made an enemy today. The question was, how far would a teenage Vordaxian go to restore his honor? As it turned out, she didn't have to wait long to find out. The Academy's living quarters were segregated by environmental needs rather than species. Methane breathers in one section, ammonia atmosphere enthusiasts in another, and so on. Zoe shared the standard oxygen-nitrogen mix habitat ring with students from 12 different species whose respiratory requirements were compatible with humans. She was heading back to her quarters after dinner when the lights in the corridor flickered, just once, barely noticeable. Zoe stopped walking. The station's power systems were triple redundant. Lights didn't just flicker. "Hello?" she called out, feeling immediately foolish. If this were a human horror vid, she'd be screaming at the protagonist right now for doing exactly that. No response came, but she could have sworn she heard a soft scraping sound from somewhere above her. She glanced up at the maintenance access panels in the ceiling. "Whoever's up there, this isn't funny," she said, trying to sound more annoyed than nervous. "There are security drones monitoring every corridor." Another scrape, then silence. Zoe weighed her options. Her room was only 20 meters ahead. Security would respond to an alert within 45 seconds, according to Academy safety protocols. She could make a run for it, but if there really was something dangerous in the ceiling conduits... Her train of thought was interrupted by a metallic clang as a maintenance panel crashed to the floor 10 meters behind her. Zoe didn't wait to see what emerged. She sprinted for her door, slapping her palm against the biometric scanner while shouting, "Security alert! Section H7, possible intruder!" The door slid open just as something heavy thudded onto the corridor floor behind her. She dove inside, the door automatically closing and locking behind her. Heart pounding, she crawled away from the door toward her emergency comm unit. Before she could reach it, a harsh scraping sound came from the door, like claws against metal. "Student Nakamura," came a voice, but not Kraxthal's. This one was deeper, with a raspier quality to the translated standard galactic. "A momentary discussion, if you please." "Identify yourself!" Zoe demanded, grabbing the nearest weapon-like object, a retractable stylus for her data tablet. "I am Vraxthal, elder clutch brother to Kraxthal, whom you educated today." Great, Zoe thought. Lina was right about the honor clutches. "Whatever grievance you think you have, there are official channels for that," Zoe said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Breaking into student quarters violates at least 15 Academy regulations." A sound came from beyond the door that the translator rendered as a laugh, though it sounded more like rocks in a garbage disposal. "I am not technically in Academy quarters, young human. I am in a maintenance accessway, speaking through an intercom I've temporarily repurposed." Zoe's eyes darted to the small speaker panel near her door. He was right. Technically, he hadn't breached her room. "What do you want?" she asked cautiously. "To understand," Vraxthal said. "Kraxthal is among the strongest of his clutch here. His defeat by a human female half his size is Perplexing. Leverage and biology, Zoe explained, still gripping her pathetic stylus weapon. Stronger doesn't always mean better. Indeed. Something in his tone made Zoe's skin prickle. We Verdaxians have a saying, knowledge of an enemy is sharper than any claw. I'm not your enemy, Zoe protested. Your brother was bullying me, and I defended myself. Brother? Ah, your translator simplifies our relationship. Kraxthal is my clutchkin, what you might call a cousin. And while you may not consider yourself an enemy, you have certainly made yourself notable. Zoe didn't like the sound of that at all. So what happens now? She asked. Now? Nothing. I merely wish to observe the human who humbled a Vordaxian warrior caste student. That's it? Another grinding laugh. Were you expecting some dramatic threat? A blood oath of vengeance, perhaps? How disappointingly primitive. Zoe felt simultaneously relieved and insulted. Modern Vordaxians understand that direct retaliation is inefficient, Vraxthal continued. True power comes from understanding. So you crawled through maintenance tunnels to have a chat? I wished to see how you would react to perceived danger. Your response was informative. A chill ran down Zoe's spine. This wasn't a threat. It was a data-gathering exercise. Somehow that felt worse. Security will be here any second, Zoe warned. They already came and went, Vraxthal said casually. Their scanning protocols don't extend to the maintenance conduits. A curious oversight. Zoe made a mental note to report that particular security flaw to Principal Devex tomorrow. Our conversation has been illuminating, Student Nakamura, Vraxthal said. Your species continues to surprise us. I look forward to observing your future. Demonstrations. The scraping sound resumed, growing fainter as the Vordaxian apparently retreated through the ceiling conduits. Zoe waited 5 minutes before finally lowering her ridiculous stylus weapon. Then she tapped her room's communication panel. Security. This is Student Nakamura. I'd like to report an unusual conversation. He did what? Lina exclaimed the next morning at breakfast, loud enough that several nearby students turned to stare. Shh, Zoe hissed. It's not that big a deal. Not that big a... Lina lowered her voice to an intense whisper. A Vordaxian Honor Clutch member broke into the station's maintenance system to essentially tell you I'm watching you, and that's not a big deal? When put that way, it did sound rather ominous. Security is handling it, Zoe said with more confidence than she felt. They've updated the sensor protocols for the maintenance conduits, and issued a formal complaint to the Vordaxian embassy. And what did your parents say? Zoe suddenly became very interested in her synthesized breakfast cereal. I haven't exactly told them yet. Zoe! They're in the middle of negotiations for the Proxima Centauri mining rights. I can't distract them with high school drama. Lina stared at her friend in disbelief. This isn't drama, this is potential interspecies conflict. You're overreacting, Zoe insisted. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? The Academy's got security everywhere. As if on cue, their data tablets simultaneously pinged with an incoming message. It was a system-wide announcement. Attention all Academy personnel and students, cultural exchange event added to calendar Vordaxian combat demonstration. Tomorrow, Central Arena, attendance mandatory for all xenobiology students. Lina shot Zoe a pointed look. You were saying? Zoe skimmed the details of the announcement. The demonstration would be led by senior Vordaxian students, including Kraxthal. This isn't a coincidence, Lina muttered. No, Zoe agreed. It's an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Public humiliation? Revenge? Accidental dismemberment? Zoe's expression hardened into determination. An opportunity to show that yesterday wasn't a fluke. Humans aren't just some quirky newcomers to be pushed around. Oh no, Lina groaned. I know that look. That's your I'm about to do something stupidly heroic look. Not heroic, Zoe corrected her. Educational. The Academy's Central Arena was designed for everything from zero-gravity sports to atmospheric adaptation training. Today, it had been configured to approximate Vordaxian standard conditions. 1.8 Earth gravity, slightly higher oxygen content, an ambient temperature of 32 degrees C. The humidity was making Zoe's uniform stick uncomfortably to her back as she sat with the other xenobiology students in the observer section. The gravity was manageable thanks to her upbringing on the station with its rotating gravity schedule. But she could tell some of the other human students were struggling with the increased weight. Principal DevX floated onto the central platform, his centipede-like body barely affected by the increased gravity. Students and faculty, welcome to this special cultural exchange event. The Vordaxian Embassy has graciously offered to demonstrate traditional combat techniques that have shaped their species' cultural development. Please welcome our Vordaxian guests. A side door opened, and 5 Vordaxians entered the arena. 4 were students Zoe recognized from the academy. The 5th was older, his scales a deeper blue with intricate patterns that the xenobiology textbook identified as status markings. This had to be Vrax Thal, though he looked different under the arena lights than he had sounded through her door intercom. Krax Thal walked in the center of the group, his posture exaggeratedly confident. When his gaze found Zoe in the audience, his inner eyelids flickered, a Vordaxian gesture of recognition and challenge. Today's demonstration will showcase traditional Vordaxian combat forms, announced Vrax Thal, his translator projecting his voice throughout the arena. These techniques have evolved over millennia on our homeworld, where gravity and predator pressure shaped our species into the apex life forms we are today. There was a polite ripple of applause. For our first demonstration, we would like to invite a volunteer from the audience. Here it comes, thought Zoe. Someone who perhaps has an academic interest in Vordaxian physical capabilities. All eyes turned to Zoe, exactly as she'd anticipated. Student Nakamura, Vrax Thal said, his translator giving his voice an almost purring quality. Would you honor us with your participation? Lena grabbed Zoe's arm. Don't you dare, she whispered. But Zoe was already standing. I'd be delighted, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena. As she made her way down to the central platform, whispers followed her. Everyone knew what had happened in the cafeteria. Everyone knew this was no random selection. Principal DevX moved to intercept her before she reached the platform. Student Nakamura, you are not obligated to participate, he said quietly. I know, sir, Zoe replied. But declining would be a cultural insult, wouldn't it? DevX's compound eyes blinked in sequence again. This feels orchestrated. Almost certainly, Zoe agreed. But I've studied Vordaxian combat forms extensively. It's a fascination of mine. Is that so? DevX didn't sound convinced. Absolutely, sir. In fact, I've prepared for this possibility. Before DevX could respond, Zoe stepped past him onto the platform. Vrax Thal's scales rippled with a pattern that translated to amusement in Vordaxian body language. Welcome, Student Nakamura. I understand you have some experience with our physical capabilities. Limited practical application, Zoe said with deliberate humility. I'm eager to learn more. Krax Thal made a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve, the Vordaxian equivalent of a snort. Excellent, said Vrax Thal. For today's demonstration, Krax Thal will showcase basic defensive techniques. You will attempt to strike him, and he will demonstrate proper blocks and counters. Zoe kept her expression neutral. Any restrictions I should be aware of? Standard Academy safety protocols apply, Vrax Thal said. No strikes to sensory organs or respiratory structures. Otherwise, please attack with sincere effort so our demonstration can be authentic. Sincere effort. Right. Zoe and Krax Thal squared off in the center of the platform. The increased gravity made her feel like she was wearing a heavy backpack, but she'd spent enough time in the Academy's variable gravity gym to adjust her movements accordingly. Begin whenever you are ready, Student Nakamura, instructed Vrax Thal, stepping back. Krax Thal assumed a traditional Vordaxian defensive posture. Primary arms forward, secondary arms guarding his central body, weight balanced on his reverse-jointed legs. His scales had darkened slightly with anticipation. Zoe also took a stance, but not one known to Vordaxian combat traditions. She adjusted her footing slightly, lowered her center of gravity, and positioned her hands in a way that would seem random to most observers. Interesting form, remarked Vrax Thal from the sidelines. Is this a traditional human combat stance? Not exactly, Zoe replied, keeping her eyes on Krax Thal. Humans are cultural borrowers. We adapt and integrate useful elements from many sources. Fascinating, said Vrax Thal, though his tone suggested more condescension than genuine interest. Please proceed. Zoe took a deep breath, centering herself. The audience had gone completely silent. Even the normally chatty Procyon were watching with their fur flat in focused attention. She moved. To most observers, what happened next was too fast to follow clearly. Zoe stepped forward as if to throw a simple punch, a naive, straightforward attack that any Vordaxian child could block. Krax Thal moved exactly as expected, his primary right arm sweeping up to deflect her blow while his secondary left arm prepared for a counter-strike. But Zoe's punch never completed its arc. Instead, she dropped suddenly lower, using the increased gravity to her advantage rather than fighting against it. Her left leg swept out in a move that, had anyone in the audience been familiar with centuries-old Earth martial arts, they might have recognized as a modified Tai Chi foot sweep. It connected perfectly with the unique joint structure of Cracksthall's reverse-jointed right leg, exactly the same vulnerability she'd exploited in the cafeteria. But this time, Cracksthall was prepared. Instead of collapsing, he used his secondary arms to cartwheel away from the sweep, his Vordaxian flexibility allowing a maneuver that would have snapped human limbs. "Predictable," he hissed through his translator. "Same technique twice?" Zoe didn't respond verbally. Instead, she continued her movement, transitioning smoothly into a different stance. Cracksthall charged, all four arms moving in the complex patterns of traditional Vordaxian combat. It was impressive, fluid, and practiced, clearly something he'd trained in for years. Zoe didn't attempt to match his technique. Instead, she evaded, redirected, and used his momentum against him. Where a Vordaxian would block, she wasn't there. Where he expected resistance, she yielded only to counter from an unexpected angle. "What is this?" Cracksthall demanded after a particularly frustrating exchange where none of his strikes landed effectively. "Fight properly." "I am," Zoe replied, barely winded despite the increased gravity. "Just not by your rules." That seemed to infuriate him. His next attack was faster, more aggressive, and less controlled. Zoe had been waiting for exactly that. As Cracksthall committed to a powerful forward strike with both primary arms, Zoe sidestepped and executed a perfect hip throw that used his own momentum and the increased gravity to send him flying over her shoulder. For a moment, it looked like Cracksthall would recover midair as he had before. But Zoe had calculated the angle perfectly. The Vordaxian's adaptable joints couldn't compensate for the trajectory and gravitational force combination. He hit the platform hard, the impact audible throughout the arena. Silence fell. Zoe stepped back and bowed. Not a Vordaxian gesture, but a human one signifying respect for an opponent. Cracksthall rose slowly, his scales fluctuating between colors in what appeared to be confusion. Instead of the rage Zoe had expected, he seemed perplexed. "How?" he asked simply. From the side of the platform, Cracksthall was watching with an intensity that made his earlier observation seem casual by comparison. "I told you," Zoe said, loud enough for her voice to carry to the audience. "Humans adapt. We study. We learn. We integrate useful elements from everywhere we go." She turned to face Cracksthall directly. "I've studied every available text on Vordaxian physiology, combat traditions, and cultural practices, including honor clutch obligations. I've trained in the Academy's variable gravity gym to understand how different gravitational environments affect biomechanics." Cracksthall's inner eyelids flickered rapidly. "You anticipated this confrontation." "Of course I did," Zoe said. "You made it inevitable after our conversation last night." A murmur ran through the audience. Principal Divek's antennae were practically vibrating with tension. "What I don't understand," Zoe continued, "is why the cultural attaché's honor clutch would risk diplomatic complications over a cafeteria incident." That caused a definite stir. Most students hadn't realized who Cracksthall actually was. "Unless," Zoe pressed, "this isn't really about honor at all." Cracksthall's scales settled into a deep, uniform blue, perceptive for a human. "Would you care to explain to the audience what this demonstration is really about?" Zoe asked. For a moment it seemed like Cracksthall might refuse. Then his mouth opened in what the translator rendered as a smile, though it displayed far too many teeth to be reassuring. "Information gathering," he said simply. "Humanity's integration into the Galactic Union has proceeded with unprecedented speed. Some species have concerns about potential undisclosed capabilities." "So this was an intelligence operation disguised as a cultural exchange?" Principal Devex interjected, his translator unable to fully mask his outrage. "A legitimate cultural exchange with secondary benefits," Cracksthall corrected smoothly. "No regulations were violated. Except for crawling through maintenance tunnels to intimidate a student," Zoe pointed out. Cracksthall made a dismissive gesture with his secondary arms. A minor unauthorized access incident at worst. Principal Devex's segments were practically quivering with anger. "This demonstration is concluded. Students, return to your regular schedules. Diplomat Cracksthall, we will discuss this incident further in my office, immediately." As the arena began to clear, Zoe found herself standing awkwardly near Cracksthall, who had risen to his feet but hadn't moved away. "You studied our combat forms," he said, his translator giving his voice a flat tone that didn't match the complex color patterns rippling across his scales. "Yes," Zoe admitted, "after our cafeteria interaction." "Why?" The question seemed to contain more than its simple wording suggested. Because I knew you'd come back for a rematch, Zoe said honestly. And because I was curious. Kraxthal's head tilted slightly. Curious? About why Vordaxians fight the way they do. Your techniques are beautiful but rigid. They assume an opponent who will respond in kind. For a moment, Kraxthal was silent, his inner eyelids flickering rapidly as he processed this. Finally, he said something his translator didn't immediately render. When Zoe's confusion must have shown on her face, he tried again. Adaptive thinking, the translator finally produced. It is not a quality my species values highly. Maybe you should, Zoe suggested. The galaxy's full of surprises. Before Kraxthal could respond, Vraxthal called to him sharply in their native language. The younger Vordaxian straightened, gave Zoe what might have been a nod, though it was hard to tell with Vordaxian neck structure, and moved to join his clutchkin. As they left, Lina rushed down from the stands, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and admiration. Are you insane? She demanded, grabbing Zoe's arm. You just embarrassed a Vordaxian diplomat in front of the entire academy. Technically, he embarrassed himself, Zoe pointed out. I just helped. This isn't funny, Zoe. There could be serious diplomatic consequences. I don't think so, Zoe said thoughtfully, watching as Principal Devex escorted Vraxthal from the arena, the Centaurian's antennae still quivering with barely contained fury. Devex is going to file an official complaint about unauthorized intelligence gathering on Academy grounds. The Vordaxian embassy will issue a formal apology blaming an overzealous cultural attaché acting without proper authorization. Lina stared at her. How can you possibly know that? Because my mother has been a diplomat for 20 years, and I've been studying interspecies politics my whole life, Zoe said with a shrug. The Vordaxian hegemony values its position in the Galactic Union too much to risk a diplomatic incident over something this petty. They'll sacrifice Vraxthal's career before they'd jeopardize their mining rights in the Epsilon sector. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I had all night, Zoe admitted. Couldn't sleep after the maintenance tunnel visit. So what happens now? Lina asked as they made their way out of the arena. Now we go to cultural integration class and pretend this was just another weird Tuesday at Galactic Academy. Lina laughed, the tension finally breaking. You know, for someone who claims humans are adaptive, you're surprisingly confrontational. I prefer educational, Zoe replied with a grin. 3 days later, events unfolded exactly as Zoe had predicted. The Vordaxian embassy issued a formal apology for an unauthorized cultural assessment conducted by an overzealous official. Vraxthal was recalled to Vordax Prime for reassignment, diplomatic code for career demotion. Zoe was summoned to Principal Devex's office once again, but this time she wasn't alone. Her mother, Ambassador Nakamura, was there too, her normally immaculate diplomatic uniform showing signs of a rushed journey from Earth. I can explain, Zoe began, but her mother held up a hand. Principal Devex has already briefed me on the situation, she said, her expression unreadable. I'd like to hear your version now. Zoe took a deep breath and recounted everything. The cafeteria incident, Vraxthal's nighttime visit, and the combat demonstration. She didn't embellish or downplay any aspects, just reported the facts as accurately as she could. When she finished, her mother was silent for a long moment. Then, to Zoe's surprise, she laughed. Well, Principal Devex, it seems my daughter has given us all a practical lesson in interspecies diplomacy. Devex's compound eyes blinked in apparent confusion. Ambassador, I was under the impression you would be displeased. Oh, I'm furious that she didn't report the maintenance tunnel incident immediately, Ambassador Nakamura said, giving Zoe a pointed look that promised a more thorough discussion later. But her handling of the public confrontation was actually quite impressive. It was? Zoe couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. The Vordaxians respect strength and directness, her mother explained. By challenging them publicly, but within their own cultural framework, you forced them to either escalate inappropriately or back down gracefully. You gave them a face-saving exit strategy. I did? Don't act so shocked, Zoe. You've been observing diplomatic negotiations since you were in diapers. Some of it was bound to sink in. Principal Devex's antennae twitched in what Zoe had come to recognize as bewilderment. So there will be no formal reprimand? Oh, there absolutely will be, Ambassador Nakamura said firmly. Just not from the Academy. My daughter and I will be having a very long conversation about appropriate channels for reporting security breaches. Zoe winced. However, her mother continued, I would like to commend the Academy's handling of the situation. Your quick action prevented this from becoming a more significant incident. DeVex's segments straightened with pride. The safety of our students is our primary concern. After a few more minutes of diplomatic pleasantries, they were dismissed. As they walked through the Academy corridors toward the Earth shuttle bay, Zoe braced herself for the lecture she knew was coming. To her surprise, her mother simply said, "You know, your father would be proud." "He would? He always said you had diplomatic instincts, even when you were being stubborn." A small smile played at the corner of her mother's mouth, though he might have preferred you demonstrate them with fewer physical altercations. "It wasn't exactly my first choice either," Zoe admitted. They walked in silence for a moment before her mother asked, "The combat techniques you used, they weren't standard Academy curriculum, were they?" "Not exactly," Zoe admitted. "Dad taught me some basics before he died. I've been studying on my own since then." Ambassador Nakamura nodded, a flicker of sadness crossing her face at the mention of her late husband. "He always believed humans needed to be prepared for a galaxy that might not always welcome us with open arms, or whatever appendages might be applicable." "Do you think he was right?" Zoe asked, suddenly serious. "I think," her mother chose her words carefully, "that the Galactic Union is a complex political entity with many competing interests. Humanity's rapid advancement has made some species uncomfortable. Your father believed in preparing for the worst while working toward the best. Like studying alien combat techniques while attending a peace-focused academy?" "Precisely." Ambassador Nakamura smiled. "Though perhaps with slightly less dramatic demonstrations in the future?" "I'll try," Zoe promised, though they both knew trouble had a way of finding her. As they approached the shuttle bay, Zoe spotted a familiar blue-scaled figure waiting near the entrance, Krax Thal. Her mother noticed him too. "A friend of yours?" "Not exactly," Zoe said. "More of a complicated acquaintance." "Ah," her mother nodded knowingly. "I'll give you a moment. The shuttle isn't scheduled to depart for another 15 minutes anyway." As Ambassador Nakamura discreetly moved toward the shuttle check-in, Zoe approached Krax Thal with caution. "Came to see me off?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "I came to inform you that Vrax Thal has been recalled," Krax Thal said, his translator giving no indication of his emotional state. "I heard. I'm sorry if that causes problems for your family." Krax Thal's scales shifted in a pattern she couldn't interpret. "Vrax Thal overstepped. The consequences are deserved." "That's very reasonable of you." "Reasonable." He seemed to consider the word. "Not a trait commonly associated with my species." "Maybe it should be," Zoe suggested. A moment of awkward silence stretched between them. "You fought well," Krax Thal finally said. "With honor, despite using unconventional techniques." Coming from a Verdaxian, this was high praise indeed. "Thank you," Zoe said. "Your traditional forms are impressive. They just need a little adaptation for unexpected situations." "Like humans," Krax Thal said, and Zoe could have sworn his translator conveyed a hint of humor. "Exactly like humans," she agreed with a smile. Krax Thal extended his primary right arm, not in a combat stance, but in a gesture she recognized from xenocultural studies, a Vordaxian acknowledgement of equals. After only a moment's hesitation, Zoe clasped his scaled forearm in the traditional response. "Perhaps," Krax Thal said, "when you return from Earth, we could exchange combat techniques. For educational purposes." "I'd like that," Zoe said, and found that she meant it. As she boarded the shuttle with her mother a few minutes later, Zoe thought about how differently things had turned out than she'd expected. What had begun as a simple cafeteria confrontation had escalated into an interspecies incident, only to resolve into, what? Not friendship exactly, but something like mutual respect. "Something on your mind?" her mother asked as the shuttle prepared for departure. Zoe looked out the viewport at the sprawling Academy station orbiting her home planet. Somewhere in there, a young Vordaxian was perhaps reconsidering his assumptions about humans, just as she was reconsidering her own assumptions about his species. "Just thinking about adaptation," she said. "Not just surviving in new environments, but thriving in them. Learning from them." Her mother nodded approvingly. "That's always been humanity's greatest strength." "And our greatest challenge," Zoe added, watching as Earth grew larger in the viewport. "Figuring out when to stand firm and when to bend. A lesson not just for humans, but for all species in the Galactic Union," Ambassador Nakamura observed. "Perhaps that's the most valuable education the Academy provides." Zoe thought about Krax Thal's offer to exchange combat techniques. about Principal DeVex's grudging respect, about the dozen different species who had witnessed a human girl stand up to a Vordaxian diplomat and emerge unscathed. "Maybe we're all students," she said softly, "in more ways than one." The shuttle accelerated toward Earth, carrying Zoe home for a well-earned break from her unintentional role as humanity's impromptu ambassador. Behind her, the Galactic Academy continued its mission of fostering understanding between species, sometimes through formal lessons, and sometimes through unexpected educational demonstrations in cafeterias and combat arenas. Either way, the galaxy was learning that humans were not to be underestimated, especially human girls with a talent for adaptive thinking and a point to prove. The end.